All right, so this video is a bit of a longer one. We're going to be talking about how you can win in the next 12 months. It's December 2023 as I'm recording this. I'm thinking about this. How can I make my next year better than the last year that's been? A lot of other people are thinking about this, and so I thought it would be a good time to put this out. We're going to dive deep into some mindset and mentality principles, a bit of philosophy surrounding productivity and goal setting and all that kind of fun stuff. And then we'll talk about some tactics at the end, some practical things that you can do to make next year extremely productive. So let's talk about how to win in the next 12 months. We're going to start with mindset and strategies. Before we do that, we need to kind of talk about the meta here, which is what is productivity. Everybody has their own definition. This is mine. It's the rate at which you complete tasks and projects that most effectively move you towards your goals. There's a bit to unpack here. Let's start with goals. So to be highly productive, you need to have a goal. You need to have a direction. And you're probably thinking, well, yeah, I know this. Like I learned this when I was 7 years old in school, how to set goals. This is nothing new. I get it. But the thing is, a lot of people know about setting goals. They've done it in the past. And at some point they just forget or they don't do it anymore. I remember one year someone asked me the question, like, what are your goals? And I couldn't answer them because I hadn't set goals that year. Like I just hadn't done it. I'd gone through the end of the year, into the new year. I was busy and I just kept working on like random things, but I wasn't goal oriented. My productivity suffered as a result. So some people just don't set goals. They forget to set goals. But also it's very easy to set goals at, say, the start of the year and then just completely forget about them, file them away, leave them in that digital note that just disappears and you don't never look at it until you get to the end of the year and do your annual review and think, I haven't achieved any of these because you weren't thinking about them and you weren't focusing on them, right? Without this direction, you lack focus. You start working across various tasks and poorly defined projects in a sort of diffused manner. If you take one person who's very goal-oriented and they know exactly what they want, and they're working on specific projects to get them closer to the achievement of that goal, compared to someone who's not goal-oriented, they're not thinking about the goals they've set, or they haven't set any. The latter person is going to work on what they feel like on a given day, week, or month, which may or may not be effective. Whereas person A, if they're truly goal-oriented and they know that they have to do certain things to get to the outcome, then they're more likely to work on the days where they don't feel like it, because they know it's important. They know it's part of the process. When you lack goals and you lack intention, you can't really compound anything in a particular direction. It's hard to compound something. It's hard to grow something, to build on what you've built when you're not oriented towards like a long-term outcome. Like, this is a thing that I'm working on. It's going to take 12 months to do. And I need to like successively build or sequentially build and build and build to get to this level step by step. The other thing is that without a goal, without clarity, your drive and intensity will likely be lower than it could be. With nothing to work towards, without being goal-oriented, the pull towards status is very hard to resist. You can see this in people who retire early. If you go to, there's a subreddit called r/fatfire. I spent some time on it, and quite often someone will post and they'll say, I retired, I'm 35 years old, and I'm depressed and I'm bored, and so on and so on and so on. They've found themselves stuck in like this stasis, this sort of comfort zone, which is not comfortable at all, as you know. And it's because they're not goal oriented. They're not challenged anymore, right? So you need something to work towards. Final thing I'll say on goals is that true productivity is about depth, not width. And when you set the right goals, it forces you to focus on depth, ideally, unless you make the mistake of setting too many goals. It's to focus on those 1 to 3 projects that will move the needle more than anything else, which leads me to the next point, tasks and projects. Second part of productivity is executing on the right projects. If I go back to the definition, it's the rate at which you complete tasks and projects that most effectively move you towards your goals. That most effectively is what we're talking about here, right? So it's about executing on the right projects. There might be a bunch of different projects that you have in mind that could lead you towards achieving your goal. But only one of those projects might produce outsized returns. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have an online business and your goal is to double revenue in the next 12 months. Well, there's multiple ways you could achieve that. There's multiple paths you could go down. You could try and build another marketing channel, move into paid advertising if you're not doing that. You could launch a new product. You could double down on an existing product that's already selling well and just make it a lot better and market it better. So straight away, we have like 3 different paths to achieving that goal. But one of them in this specific business is probably going to outperform the others. And maybe the answer is to do all 3 in 1 year if you have the capacity, right? But like if you only have the capacity for one, then you want to pick the one that's going to outperform the others. And you don't always know what this is. You can't always be certain about it. You can't be exactly sure, but you want to try and get as close as possible. You want to be able to step back, look at what's in front of you, analyze it, have a think about it, and then commit to working on the one that you think is the best. This is about being deliberate in the work you choose to do, because projects are power laws. You are going to work extremely hard regardless, so you might as well do it in the right direction. You might as well choose the project that has the most leverage. If it was just about hard work, then you would see a lot more rich people, because there's some hard workers out there who don't take the time to step back and figure out what the high leverage projects are. And so they miss out on a bunch of upside that could quite easily be achieved had they just made a different decision. So you need goals, you need to identify what the optimal projects are, and you need to do these projects with a standard of quality. You need to do the work with a standard of quality that produces the outcome you want. You can have the goals, you can identify the right projects. This is strategy. But if you fail on the execution part, then the strategy doesn't matter, right? Like you can have the perfect goal and you can have the perfect project. Like let's say to double your business revenue, I'm going to launch a new product. But if you half-ass the development and marketing of that new product, then you're unlikely to achieve your goal of doubling the business revenue. Doesn't matter how good the theory is, the strategy is, the plan is, you need to execute with standards. Productivity is not just about speed, it's also about quality of output. The person who takes 3 times longer to complete a project than someone else, but doubles the quality of the output, usually ends up winning, because a doubling of quality can often mean a 5, 10x, or 100x difference in results. You see this all the time, especially in like online media. Take YouTube, for example. One person can spend 3 times the length or 3 times the amount of effort on a video than the other person. It doesn't get 3 times more views. It gets 300 times more views, right? There's exceptions, of course, but generally speaking, spending more time, raising your standards is worth it. It is a high leverage thing to do. James Clear's a good example of this. As far as I know, he wrote his book over like 3 years, and his goal was to just make it the best book he could possibly write. Like to write the best book he could possibly write. He stepped back from his business a bit. He kind of automated it, and he just focused on this one project for years. And it would be easy to look at someone who's doing that and go, man, like you're taking so long. Why? It doesn't need to be like your standards are so high. They don't need to be that high. You're being a perfectionist, so on and so on and so on. Look at what happened. Like Atomic Habits is arguably one of the most successful books of the past decade. Now, there's a caveat to this, which is that volume does matter in some situations. If you're a beginner, quantity is usually the most effective path to skill improvement and results. I've talked about this in another video on my channel. It's called like Why Quality Over Quantity is Bad Advice. Clickbait title, but the video is good. So there's a caveat here. Volume does matter. You should see these as levers, right? So like quantity is one, quality is one. And you need to be discerning about when to use each one. If you can use both, then you should use both. And you should be aware of your bias. If you are a perfectionist, if you're someone who tends to take too long and you use your standards as an excuse to not ship work, to not publish anything, to not finish anything, then that's not a good habit. That's not a good behavior pattern. And so you should lean towards quantity. You should lower your standards a bit and just get things out. But if you're someone who tends to rush the process and you publish things or ship things when you know they could be better had you put in another 10, 20 hours into it, then you should lean more towards quality, raise your standards. The true productivity is about finding the balance of these two levers. But in my experience, personally, I've set my standards way too low in the past, and I wish I hadn't. And I can clearly see the times where I have set them higher, it's produced far better results. Again, it's a form of leverage, just the same way choosing the right projects is. If you raise your standards and you put in that 10, 20% extra work to take something from good to great, the leverage that you get from that can be 5, 10, 100x difference. Okay, so we've got goals, we've got the projects that we choose, we've got standards, which is a principle for execution, and then we've got work rate. This is what most people think of when they think of productivity. So this is how well do you work, how hard do you focus, how effective and efficient are you? You've got the goals, you've got the projects, you've got the standards. Now when you sit down at your desk and do the work, how are you doing that work? How good are you at doing the work? The simplest way to increase your work rate is simply to work more hours. A lot of people don't want to hear this. They look for productivity hacks. They look for note-taking apps, new calendar apps, whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're only working like an hour a day and you could be working 4, then that's the biggest gain to be had. Just simply increasing the amount of hours you work. I know that not everyone can do that. I know people in difficult situations, they've only got an hour a day. But if you have the capacity and you're not using it and you want to achieve certain goals, then maybe you should just hit that capacity. 4 hours of deep work will always beat 1, especially over long timelines. And increasing work hours is overrated, like I kind of said, because most people find reasons to avoid working more hours. They seek shortcuts, they seek hacks. And so if you can embrace the pain and discomfort and build the capacity to focus for longer periods of time, you will have a competitive advantage. However, at some point, as you probably know, there are diminishing returns on increased work hours, especially if you are doing creative work. There's a reason why the majority of successful authors write for only a few hours every day. It's because they can't really do much more. They hit that 3-hour mark, 4-hour mark, and it's just exhausts them mentally. I'm sure you've had a day where you've done this type of work. It's a couple of hours, you get to the end of it, you're like, I am done. I feel super productive though, because like I've done a lot of work, or I've made a bunch of decisions, or I've pushed something forward creatively, but you just can't do much more. And so there's diminishing returns past that point. If you try and push yourself further, probably not going to achieve much. It's a quote from Robert Greene here to back this up. He writes, I would only do 2 or 3 hours of writing a day because that was all I could stomach. An hour in the morning and maybe 2 hours in the afternoon, and that's about it. Notice the language that he uses. That's all I could stomach. Like clearly he's working at a level of intensity that is not normal to most people. Until you reach those diminishing returns though, it pays to increase the quantity of time that you work. If your work hours aren't sufficient, no amount of productivity hacks or systems will move the needle. One way to increase your work rate is to increase the time you spend, but another way is to increase focus. The level of your focus, the intensity of your focus, right? For example, if you're 100% focused on a task at hand, then by definition, you'll be at least twice as productive as if you were 50% focused. I say at least because if you're doing creative work, it's not that simple. If you're 100% focused, you're in a state of flow, and the output that you do, like the work that you do, is probably going to be of great quality because you're being more creative, because you're in a flow state. So it's not just that you do twice as much work, it's that the work you do is of such quality because you're fully engaged in the task. If you're 50% focused, it's very hard to do creative work. A personal example, I write every morning, and on days where I'm like fully focused and locked in, I can get 2,000 words done in an hour. But if I'm distracted, if I forget to put my phone on Do Not Disturb and leave it out of the room, I get a call halfway through, so on and so on and so on. I get pulled out of that flow state. I might only hit 1,000 words, and I'll end that session not feeling like I really gave it my best. And that's not a good feeling. This is also why Naval says work like a lion, sprint, then rest. If you can get done in 4 hours what most people get done in 8 hours, then you're a highly productive individual. And if you're like self-employed, why wouldn't you want to work 4 hours instead of 8? Like, I'd much rather be 100% focused for 4 hours and then do whatever I want for the rest of the day instead of like half-assing it for 8. The third component to rate of output is skill level. The more skilled you are, the faster you'll work. The person who's been writing for 10 years is simply going to be faster and more effective than the person who's been writing for 1 month. So we can sum this up as time times focus times skill level equals rate of output. These are all levers that we can pull. We can extend our time, put more hours in. We can increase our focus, use those hours better, and we can increase our skill level, which again is using those hours better. Okay, so now that we've discussed productivity, we've kind of discussed the meta, which I think is important to understand as we go in to the rest of these mindset strategies. Let's move on to setting the right goals. A couple of principles for goal setting, some of which you've probably heard, but worth going over again. So as I alluded to at the start of the video, it's easy to fall into a trap where you're not goal-oriented. Even if you've previously set goals, you might forget about them. Life gets busy. You're not focusing on them anymore. So you must remind yourself of the goals you've set. That's just the first thing as a reminder. When it comes to goal setting, there's no blueprint for setting the right type of goals. You'll hear people say, oh, you need to set more challenging goals. Or you'll hear other people say, no, you need to set easier goals that are more achievable because then you'll be more confident. The evidence tends to lean towards the former, that by setting more challenging goals, you're actually more productive, you focus harder. I would err towards that, but it's again quite a specific individual thing. Some people are highly challenge-oriented and they need to set big goals, otherwise they get bored extremely quickly and they procrastinate like nothing else. Other people lack confidence, self-belief. Maybe they haven't had a good past few years. And so what they really need is just to develop a series, or kind of get a series of small wins under their belt. And so maybe the best thing for them is to actually set some smaller goals that they're confident they can achieve. Not certain, but confident. Achieve them and then kind of build momentum up and snowball it from there. So you need to understand what your bias is here. And you can look back at your life. You can look back at the past year even. Look at the goals you've set. And if it's like, okay, I set that goal, I was way off the mark, I was extremely unrealistic, and you can see that pattern across your goal setting behavior, then maybe you should pull back a bit. If you look back at your goals and you've achieved all of them and you went beyond, then maybe you need to up the challenge a little bit and make them harder. Now, while there's no blueprint to setting goals, there are some guidelines and some principles that I think are helpful. The first is to count the cost. When we set goals, we usually do so in a state of high energy and high motivation. We're future focused and we're optimistic. So you're probably watching this like end of the year or halfway through the year or whatever. And like when I set goals, I'm not working. I've gone to an Airbnb or at the beach or whatever. Like it's summer in New Zealand in December. It's a good time. I'm relaxed. I'm not in the trenches, as they say. I'm cool. And so I'm in a state of high energy and high motivation. Problem with that is that's easy. It's easy to set goals in that state. It's easy to think about how you're going to achieve them. It's easy to just like map it out in your head. But in reality, executing on the tasks and projects that move you towards the achievement of your goals is hard. There's always a cost. Your high energy and high motivation will not last throughout the whole year. You will get to a point where it just sucks. And so you need to keep that in mind. There's going to be a cost. If you count that cost up front, then you'll be less surprised when you're faced with it. If you say to yourself, I'm going to double my business revenue this year, I know that it's going to demand a lot of me. I know that there are going to be weeks where I need to put in 60 hours, where I need to sacrifice some of my social life. I might even need to sacrifice some exercise time. I love training 2 hours a day, but I might need to bring that down to 1 hour a day. I might need to sacrifice this and this and this. That's the cost. Is that worth it to me? You need to count that up and ask yourself. If you do that, like I said here, you'll be less surprised when faced with it. It'll come up. You'll have a bunch of 60-hour weeks ahead of you, and you'll think, this is what I told myself would happen. So I'm mentally prepared for this. If you don't count the cost, you'll be blindsided by it. So some common costs are time, stress, effort, sacrificing of other goals or areas of life, leisure. It's up to you whether you want to incur these costs and make these sacrifices. I can't answer that for you, but it's something to consider when you're setting goals. I kind of talked about this. Double business revenue next year. Maybe you have to increase work hours by 20%. It's probably a bit more stress. The new hobby you've taken up needs to take a back seat until things are smoothed out. All right, next principle is simplicity and narrow focus. So most of us have a tendency towards complexity, a tendency to diffuse our focus. Complexity is comfortable because it allows us to do the work around the work instead of the actual work, right? If your goal is to write a book, but you tell yourself as part of your goal plan or project plan that you need to do like X, Y, and Z, or you need to set up this or blah, 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 then you can spend a lot of time doing all the pre-work and the planning and all this other stuff that kind of supports it, but is really just avoidance of the actual work, that you can just engage in all of that and never face the resistance, which we're going to get to. When you simplify, you strip everything back and you're basically faced with like a binary. It's like, here's the work in front of me. I'm either going to do it or I'm not. And when you don't do it, when you do procrastinate, you feel it. You're like, I'm not doing what I said I was going to do. I'm not sitting down to write for 3 hours. I'm not working on the book. I'm not doubling my business revenue. I'm not launching the product. You know what I mean? When it's complex, you can procrastinate. You can feel better about it because you're still in motion. So I would err towards setting less but higher impact goals. In an ideal world, you'd actually have like one high impact goal for the year. Some of the most effective people I know are the people who say, my only goal for this year is to just do this one thing. I'm just writing a book. That's all I'm doing. Yeah, I'm maintaining these systems and like maintaining a business, but this is my singular goal, and like that comes before everything else. Life is complicated though, and you likely have multiple responsibilities across multiple areas of your life, and so one goal doesn't cut it. But instead of setting like 5 to 10 goals for like each area of your life, which I've seen people do, it's absurd, aim for like 1 to 3 max, ideally 1. When you're doing this kind of prioritization of goals, and my annual planning, annual review template, you'll see that one of the steps is to just list out as many goals you can think of for each area and then whittle them down to like 1 to 3. When you're going through that process, it should feel painful and a bit sacrificial. Like if you've got 5 exciting, interesting work goals for the year, it's like pick 2, pick 1, pick 3, but don't do 5. And it should feel hard to go down to 3, right? Because the other 2 are like still exciting. But you'll be far more effective if you can do that and you can simplify, which you can, by the way. Simplification and the narrowing of focus creates an energy that cannot be gained when complexity and diffusion are present. When you've just got one path ahead of you, you've got one goal, you can kind of relax into it in a way. And it creates this like intense sense of purpose and energy and mental clarity. You don't have to worry about a bunch of stuff. Don't get me wrong, it's still hard. There's a reason why people don't focus like this. But when you actually commit to it and you commit to the one goal, the energy that you get from it is insane. As you can see from this diagram, which is from Essentialism. Great book, by the way. You should check that out if you haven't read it already. All right. Another principle is to stack your whys. I mentioned that you set goals when you're in a high motivation, high energy state. You set goals at the top of the summit. But what pulls you through the valleys? What pulls you through the hard times where you don't want to do the work, where you feel like quitting? You need a good reason for doing what you're doing. And usually it needs to be deeper than just extrinsic things, like I just want to make a bit more money, or I want to look cool, or whatever. Sometimes the why can be simple. It doesn't need to be some complex narrative about your entire life. At the start of this year, I ran New Zealand's toughest marathon. Wow. I walked a lot of it because there's a lot of elevation, but I completed it, right? The main reason I did that is just because I wanted to do something hard. Like I felt a kind of compulsion to do something hard at the start of the year. There wasn't any deeper reason. It wasn't like I was trying to overcome some sort of trauma from my childhood. I mean, maybe I was, but like, how would I know? I was just telling myself that I needed to do something hard. And so sometimes that can be enough to just carry you through your goal. It's just like, actually, my goal for the year is to do this because I need to do something hard. It's been a while since I've been challenged, and that is my why, because I know that it's important for me to be challenged. Other times you need to stack the whys and really drill down to the truth. So, for example, we'll go back to the double business revenue. I'm going to double my business revenue next year. Why? So I can take home more money. Why? So I can buy a house. Why? So I can provide more security for my family, and so I can finally build the home office I've dreamed about. And so it's like when you're stuck in that valley of despair halfway through the year and you want to slow down or take it easy or whatever, you can just look at your whys and go, it's not about the money. It's actually about this and this and this, which are the most important things, and I cannot quit because of those. This is also a good strategy for setting the right goals, by the way. Like if you're stuck between multiple goals, you can kind of go down this why stack and get to the core motivations behind them. So it might be that you have a goal A, which is actually motivated by desire for status, which may not be as useful as goal B, which is motivated by a desire to do work that you're curious about, which will probably pull you through a lot more difficulty than just a desire for status. All right, final principle on the goal setting stuff is that 10x is easier than 2x, which is the title of a book from Benjamin P. Hardy, which I do recommend. It's a good book. It's a quote from Tim Ferriss, which I got from the book. 99% of people in the world are convinced they are incapable of achieving great things, so they aim for the mediocre. The level of competition is thus fiercest for realistic goals, paradoxically making them the most time and energy consuming. It's easier to raise 1 million than it is 100,000. It's easier to pick up the one perfect 10 in the bar than the 5 eights. So when we think of incremental progress, of doing something slightly better, that's a 2x mindset, right? And if you want to 2x, you basically just need to double your output and effort. It's like a linear thing. But to achieve 10x results, you need to act and think in a non-linear way. I've been using this example of doubling business revenue, right? Which is a 2x mindset. And nothing wrong with that. But what if the goal was to 10x business revenue? Well, you can't just do what you've been doing, but do it better. You've got to take like a radically different approach. And there's probably only like a few pathways that actually work, right? You can see here, 10x goals are often simpler and paradoxically easier than 2x goals because there's only a few paths to the 10x goals, or maybe only one. Whereas to double business revenue, you can do a bunch of different stuff. And then you've got a bunch of different projects and all that kind of stuff. It's hard to decide and it gets complex. But to 10x, there's likely only a couple of paths to that, maybe one. And it's hard to find that path, and you'll probably fail. But when you do come across it and you figure it out, it simplifies everything. All right, so we've looked at goal setting. Now, what happens when you set a goal and you start executing on it? I've kind of talked about this. You set your goal at the end of the year or start of the year, and you feel good, you're excited, and you think, finally, this is the year where everything changes. This is the year where I evolve and I win and I achieve things, and it's not going to be a repeat of last year. And then you get a few weeks in and you're back to where you were, and things are hard and you're procrastinating. It's because of resistance. Resistance As Stephen Pressfield defines it, and arguably coined the term, or at least popularized it in The War of Art, he says, resistance will tell you anything to keep you from doing your work. It'll perjure, fabricate, falsify, seduce, bully, cajole. Resistance is protean. It will assume any form if that's what it takes to deceive you. It will reason with you like a lawyer or jam a 9mm in your face like a stick-up man. Resistance has no conscience. It will pledge anything to get a deal, then double-cross you as soon as your back is turned. If you take resistance at its word, you deserve everything you get. Resistance is always lying and always full of shit. You can have all the theory right. You can know what your goal is. You can know the project that's going to help you achieve it, the most optimal one. You can have your schedule laid out. You can understand the importance of focus and deep work, all the stuff that we talked about. But none of that is doing the work. As soon as you sit down to do the work, you're faced with resistance, and it's how you respond to that resistance that makes or breaks you. Resistance manifests itself fundamentally from an unwillingness to change or put in effort. You want to remain in homeostasis. You do not want to expend energy. The resistance you face when thinking about going to the gym or going to a run is similar to the resistance you face when sitting down to doing creative work. They're both things that induce some level of pain and discomfort and some change of state, effort. And so your body just instinctively doesn't want to do that. Now, a mistake some people make is they think that resistance is a sign they're focusing on the wrong goal or the wrong path. They think, if I'm so uncomfortable, then I obviously shouldn't be doing this. But that's a different type of resistance. And you can intuitively tell the difference, right? If you've ever worked a job that you hate, then you know what I'm talking about. It's like a feeling of dread. Whereas the resistance you face when you're working on a goal that's important to you, it's different. It's still uncomfortable. Maybe sometimes it feels like dread. But when you succumb to it and you don't do the work, you feel a bit guilty. Whereas in a job you hate, when you don't do the work, it's kind of like whatever. And if you don't deal with this, if you keep switching goals, projects, and paths every time you feel resistance set in, because you tell yourself the narrative that it's a sign you're focusing on the wrong thing, then you never get off the hamster wheel. Because inevitably what happens, you face resistance, you think, this isn't the right project I should be working on, you switch to another one, and then resistance comes up again and you repeat the process. And so you never get over the hill and see what's on the other side. So let's look at some strategies for overcoming resistance. The first one being to expect resistance always. Pursuing any worthwhile goal will require some enduring of challenge and difficulty, and therefore it will produce resistance. You should be aware of this so that you're not surprised when it comes. You should instead expect it. If you don't expect resistance to arrive, to be there, then it's easy to make excuses and procrastinate when it comes up. You can simply say, oh, I'm not feeling it today. Oh, I woke up and I had this voice in my head saying that I just can't work, or it doesn't make sense to work today. And that's resistance. Like, it's lying to you. You don't need to feel it. You don't need to feel good, feel motivated, feel happy to do the work. You can simply sit down and do the work anyway. And one useful mental reframe is to just treat the work for what it is. Resistance is devious, right? It'll tell you a story about how your work is more difficult and complex than it really is. Let's say you want to start publishing YouTube videos, but every time you think about writing a script and sitting down to record it, you feel this immense resistance. You tell yourself things like, I'm just not good on camera, or I just can't seem to write any words for the script. But at the end of the day, the work itself is something you know how to do. You've typed words before. You probably reply to emails every day. It's a simple process of moving your fingers and taking what's in your head and putting it into the digital world. You also talk to people probably every day. The difference in this case is you're talking to a camera instead, but it's something you know instinctively how to do. What makes you hesitant is the narrative that resistance is telling you, or that you're telling yourself. And so as much as you can, you want to look at your work for what it is. You want to detach yourself. You want to do it mechanically. Put one foot in front of the other. Quiet your mind. Treat the work for what it is. Realize that overcoming resistance produces its own rewards. Beyond the actual work you're doing, beyond its success, I'm talking external success, The daily victory over resistance provides a level of fulfillment, satisfaction, and momentum that few get to experience. There's something about the life of doing creative work, of pursuing hard goals, of making things, of building things, that is just deeply rewarding. Cherish this fact and remind yourself of it when you don't want to do the work. That when you're faced with that resistance, when you wake up one day and you don't feel like doing it, but you know you should, that you will feel so much better if you do it anyway. Every day that you achieve victory over resistance further separates you from the person you used to be. Okay, let's talk about pain tolerance, resilience, and perseverance, also known as mental toughness. You know, I find it odd that productivity gurus talk so much about like optimization and calendar management hacks and finding your passion and optimizing your caffeine intake, and they completely ignore the fact that a huge component of doing great work and being productive is how well you can tolerate discomfort and pain of just like doing the work anyway, as we've talked about. Now, when I say pain, it's a strong word. I'm not talking about physical pain. I'm talking about the pain of overcoming resistance, of working when you don't want to, pushing through the last 10% of that project when all you want to do is quit. There is a painful aspect to that. The truth is, there is no path, no goal, no endeavor worthwhile. Forgot to put that in because there are some goals that perhaps aren't worthwhile. There's no path, no goal, no endeavor worthwhile that is without pain. Even the most passionate artist or motivated author still faces resistance and therefore needs to deal with pain. That's why the whole idea of like following your passion is incomplete advice, because it makes people think that following your passion is bliss, when in reality, it's actually hard. And there are days where it feels like you're doing the completely wrong thing. The perfect, easy path doesn't exist, nor do you want it to exist, because pain is what produces growth. There's a great quote from Alex Hormozy where he says something like, if you wanted to design a human, or if you wanted to like create the conditions for a person that would make them tough, you probably wouldn't put them in comfortable situations. And it's like, if you want to become the person who's resilient, who's got a strong work ethic, who's done great work, who's disciplined, then you need to go through pain. Ray Dalio, who's way smarter than me, and you should probably listen to him instead, says the same thing. Pain plus reflection equals progress. And he says there's no avoiding pain, especially if you're going after ambitious goals. So how do you develop this pain tolerance? Well, first, it's about overcoming the resistance again and again. I'm repeating myself so much, but it's because I'm trying to drill it into my head as well as yours. You're making a choice to go a little longer and do a little bit more each day. It's developed best on the hardest days, and the hard days are a gift if treated right, because the decision to do the work on the hard days is what produces strength. This has been one of the most powerful reframes for me in like the past 6 months, is just when I have a day where I'm just sitting there and I just feel a bit low, I don't want to do the work, as much as I can, I remind myself, it's like these are the days that matter the most. They're not the days that are the most productive. They're not the days where I'm going to get the most work done, or I'm going to have the longest time in flow states. In fact, they're often days where I just have a low output, but they're like building blocks for the discipline and the pain tolerance and the resilience that I want to build. And reminding myself of that means I'm far more likely to not procrastinate and just sit down and do the work and do what I can, right? Just push something forward. Anyone can sit down and do the work when they feel highly motivated and energized, but not everyone can sit down and do the work when they feel hopeless about what they're doing and are exhausted. You want to be the person, hopefully, I certainly do, the person who can work in any situation. Accept that you can be much stronger than you are right now and that you need to be if you want to evolve to the next level. The other thing to mention is that you can't avoid pain anyway. Like even if you didn't set hard goals, you didn't like face the resistance that comes with those hard goals. Life is full of suffering and pain. There are things that will happen to you that cause pain or already have, but the pain that comes from avoidance is absent of the fulfillment, the satisfaction that you get from the completion of great work, right? So if you're going to pursue goals and you don't overcome resistance, you probably experience some pain anyway, the pain of non-achievement, and you won't get any of the benefits of achievement. Put more succinctly, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret is far worse than the pain of discipline. Now, I don't want you to get like an overly negative picture here. The pursuit of true productivity and doing great work is deeply rewarding. The pain is worth it, otherwise people wouldn't do it, right? It's not a negative thing. In my mind, it's far more rewarding than a life of pure leisure. I also don't think you should necessarily pursue pain for pain's sake either. I do think sometimes you should move towards the pain because it's a sign that that's the thing you should be doing. And there is value to setting goals that are enjoyable and fun and all this kind of stuff. Not all of us are David Goggins, nor should we be. The point is, if you want to achieve challenging goals, you want to do challenging work, then you should expect it to be challenging. You should expect it to be uncomfortable. You should expect there to be some pain along the way. Better to expect it and deal with it than for it to take you by surprise. All right, let's talk about one more mindset thing, and then we'll briefly move on to some tactics. Climb focus versus summit focused. I had to put a photo in here because I live in New Zealand and I like hiking and hunting and focusing on summits, as you can see here. It is a summit, not that high, maybe like 1,800 meters. You can convert that into feet if you're American. But what do I mean by climb focused? Basically, you should focus on systems over goals. I know that this might sound like it contradicts what I've said, but it doesn't. You need to set the goals. You need to remind yourself of them. But on the daily, when you're doing the daily work, you should be focusing on the system. You should be focusing on the climb. If you focus too heavily on the summit, then you'll get discouraged and get discouraged fast. If you've ever gone hiking and you're climbing a mountain or a hill and the summit's far away and it's hard and you're out of breath and you're looking up at the summit and you're like, it hasn't got any closer and I've been walking for like an hour. Like, that's a discouraging feeling. And the best thing to do in that situation is just to like not look at the summit and just look down at your feet, straight ahead, whatever, and put one foot in front of the other. Because the other problem is you get false summits as well, where you think you're at the top, where you think you're close, and you get closer and you realize actually the summit's behind that, and you've still got another 2 hours or what have you. It's also very discouraging. The summit is the objective. The climb is the focus. You need the objective, because if you're just putting one foot in front of the other, but you've got no objective, then that's also discouraging. But if you're focused too heavily on the summit, you'll get discouraged. So you have the objective, but you're focusing on what's in front of you. You're focusing on the daily 4 hours of deep work, not the 6-month-long project, right? Because if you think too much about this, the 6-month-long project, you're going to feel behind, you're going to feel discouraged. But if you just think about the 4 hours of deep work in front of you, that single step, that's a lot more easy to deal with. Okay, so that is mindset and strategy out of the way. Let's talk about tactics. I was thinking, should I put some tactical stuff in? I don't know. I feel like I've talked about tactics a lot on the channel, but some of the mindset stuff just feels a bit up in the clouds. So I wanted to give some sort of practical advice too. The first one is the meta tactic. I love talking about meta stuff, and that is to radically focus on raising your energy levels. Energy is the foundation of everything. No amount of mindset, goal setting strategy, or self-help book consumption will make a difference if you operate with an unnecessarily low amount of energy every day. I say unnecessarily because sometimes you're just going to wake up with low energy. You can't use energy as the eternal cope, which I saw someone do on Twitter the other day. They said, I'm going to pursue this project, this hard goal, but I need to get my energy up first. And like the context with which they said it and all this kind of stuff, it was like clearly someone who was just rationalizing their inaction. There will always be days, weeks, and months where your energy levels are lower, but you want to be mentally resilient to push through regardless. Like, you do want to be able to get up after a bad sleep and still do the work, right? At least I do. I want to be the human being who can do that. not the one who says, oh, I didn't sleep well, so I'm not going to do the work today. Ideally, you have both. You have high amounts of energy and high amounts of mental fortitude. Now, I thought about sharing a bunch of nutrition, exercise, and sleep stuff, but I'm not going to because for a number of reasons. Like, I've experimented for a decade, and I know it works for me, and I can't just like share a bunch of bullet points. And also, like, everyone has different opinions and all that kind of stuff. But really briefly, nutrition-wise, whole foods, avoid processed food. I'm not like carnivore, low carb, anything like that. I like sugar, natural sugar. I use it as fuel for exercise. Makes me feel good. I don't fast that often, but I just avoid all the bad stuff, like 80-20 approach, right? Exercise, lift a few times a week, do cardio, do jiu-jitsu. Sleep optimization, I'm pretty strong on. Blackout curtains, eye mask, cool dark room, mouth tape, nasal strip when I've got allergies like this time of year. But yeah, I'm not going to go deeper into it because it's beyond the scope of this video, right? And I'm not an expert, but experts are kind of overrated, let's be honest. All right, tactic 1 is to write out your principles. Spend time coming up with like 10 to 15 principles, type them all out, and put them on a page like I've done here. Then read them every morning. It's just a good way to kind of get yourself in the right headspace and drill in a bunch of stuff. I never used to do this. I used to think it was like a bit cringe and useless. And, you know, some people definitely hype it up way more than it actually is. Like, it's not going to magically do the work for you. But it's like a good priming exercise, right? So here are mine. If you want to look at them. I'm not going to read them out. You can pause the video. But a lot of them you can see are like centered around embracing discomfort, because going into the next 12 months, like, that's kind of my theme. It's like, this year's been cool. It's been quite comfortable. And going forward, I want to lean into the challenge. I want to lean into the discomfort. And so a lot of my principles are centered around that. And I might get 12 months from now and change some of them up. I might have a different focus. We'll see. You can copy some of these, but I would recommend actually like taking the time to think about your own. There can be quotes from books. Like, some of these are quotes. Not sure which ones, but like, they're not all my original words. They're just things I've got from books or articles. And I'm like, I like that. I want to remind myself of that. Second, treat your calendar as sacred. I think tasks are better placed in a calendar than a task manager, because when they're placed in your calendar, they're like a commitment. You've blocked out the time. You've said during 10 to 11 a.m., I'm focusing on this. But it only works if you develop the link between yourself, your self-integrity, and the calendar. If you constantly bypass and you break the commitments on your calendar, then you obviously weaken its effect. That's why you should only put on what you're committed to doing. So I don't recommend doing that thing where, like, which I've done way too many times, where you like get to a Sunday afternoon, you're planning the week ahead. You have that moment of like, I need to change everything up. I'm going to be super productive this week. And so you plan everything down to the hour on your calendar. And of course, the end of Monday comes around and you're like, you're derailed, right? So strip it back, just put on the things you're committed to doing, and then do them. And what you'll do is you'll strengthen the calendar self-integrity link. And as you do that, it will benefit you more, because it means when you put something on your calendar, like, you're telling yourself, hey, this is super important. I'm going to do it. So treat it as sacred. Once something's on there, it's on there. Do it, whether you feel like it or not. Another tactic is thinking time. Once a week, schedule 30 to 60 minutes of thinking time, minimum. No devices, pen and paper, sit down or go for a walk and just write what comes to mind, or think through a specific problem. It's amazing how few people do this, right? Warren Buffett has a great quote. He says, I insist on a lot of time being spent thinking, almost every day, to just sit and think. That is very uncommon in American business. I read and think, so I do more reading and thinking and make less impulse decisions. than most people in business. I do it because I like this kind of life. If you're a business owner, then I recommend the book, The Road Less Stupid, and work through the thinking time exercise in the book. It's really good. All right, tighten deadlines. These are simple, by the way. You've probably noticed that by now, but simple works. Projects and tasks always take longer than expected. The planning fallacy shows us that. But at the same time, Parkinson's law is also real, which states that work expands to fill the time allotted. So there's a sort of tension here, a bit of a paradox. But in my mind, it's better to set short deadlines and then have to change them or extend them than to set too lenient a deadline or too long a deadline and lack the intensity or have something take longer than it actually needs to take. Funny thing about short deadlines is that the quality can paradoxically be higher with those short deadlines because you have a high level of focus and intensity resulting in better work. Now, there are limits to this. Big projects take a lot of time and sometimes you can't define how much time they're going to make. What you should do though is break it down and set deadlines for the subtasks. So if you say, I'm going to write a book and I'm expecting it to take like 18 months, it's like that's not really a tight deadline, even if it might feel like one. But you could set a deadline for, well, I'm going to write 500 words a day or 1,000 words a day. And that's like the tight deadline. Or I'm going to do this amount per week. Or I'm going to have the first draft done in the first 6 months and so on and so forth. Related to this, and your mileage may vary with this one, I'm admittedly terrible at it, but going forward, it's something that I want to do, and that is to set hard limits on work hours. Because Parkinson's law, like tighter deadlines, if you, on a given day, you say, I'm going to finish work at 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. or 3 p.m., you're more likely to be focused during the day and get done what needs to be done, as opposed to if you just said, I'm going to stop working when I feel like stopping working. In that case, you can just do whatever you want because you're like, I'm going to be working late, so it's not a big deal. Like, there's no deadline. The other thing it helps with, which I've noticed when I have stuck to this habit, is it helps you focus on the long game and it reduces anxiety. Every time I've like worked a late night or felt the compulsion to work late when I haven't really needed to, it's been fueled by fear or anxiety or like I need to get this done, like I need to work faster and harder and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, that's never fun and it's actually not useful, at least in my experience. So by setting the limits on work hours, it's saying, I've done what I can today. It's about consistency. It's about chaining successful days together. I can't get everything done in one day. This is a long game. Like it's a long time horizon game and I need to respect that. And I'll feel better if I do. And finally, the final tactic is to work in productive sprints. You want to have consistency. You want to be chaining those successful days together. But you also want intensity because it helps you make better work. You increase your level of focus. You get more done in less time. You should work, then rest. Work like a lion, as Naval says. So it might be you've got a goal to do something and you think it's going to take you 30 days or so. See if you can do it in half that time with high intensity and rest for a week afterwards. Or make it 21 days, right? Do it faster, sprint, then rest. Take time to think about what the next thing is and so forth. You can do this yourself. I've got an acronym called the SPRINT acronym. Singular focus, persistent action, robust accountability. So having someone else or a group of people that check up on you or you're checking in with them. Intensity, no distractions, and time bound. Thanks so much for watching this video. And if you liked it, if you like this style, then I'd love to know. Would you like me to make more of these types of videos with the slides, or did you just hate it and you're looking at the last hour of your life and going, why did I spend it watching this video? What a waste. Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.